Hello. Some Brits watching this video, in which I'm going to talk about the USA President Biden again, might think that I'm ignoring Britain, and I shouldn't be. But the fact is that this earthquake that's happened in America with President Biden we are going to be suffering the shockwaves, not just for the next few months, but for the rest of history. It is going to change our relationship with America. It's going to change everybody's relationship with America, because until now, we could more or less rely on the American president doing what he was saying, because there was a control over the president from the media. But there is no control anymore from the media over the media's chosen representative, in this case Biden. And this has completely changed the dynamic of politics, and it means that we can't rely on America anymore doing what we might call the right thing, whether we agree with the right thing or not. And it's not just Britain, of course, it's Europe, it's countries like Taiwan and Australia. Nobody can rely on America anymore. It's going to change everybody's ideas about how to conduct themselves. So this is very important. But I'm not going to be discussing Biden politically at the moment. I'm going to be talking about Biden and the Shakespeare play Macbeth. I'm going to approach Biden's tenancy of the Oval Office from a literary standpoint. I think that we can draw quite a few lessons from studying the parallels between the play as Shakespeare framed it for the London stage and the situation we see unfolding in front of our eyes on the international stage. And I'm talking about it in this way because of this article, I'll put it up here, in the Telegraph, in which is discussed the drive to remove Shakespeare from the curriculum. I'm not going to go through it. I just want you to see, that's the headline, Find Time to Awaken to Shakespeare, whose work is so much more than woke. And yes, indeed it is. I'm just pointing out that there's this move afoot to do away with such literature as Shakespeare, and it might be worth considering why it still says much about this world in which we are living. Some people believe that teachers want to ditch Shakespeare because they're simply too lazy to deal with it. There's no doubt that some are, and there is also no doubt that Shakespeare can be very difficult to teach. And there are others who might say that there are forces at work in our society right now, not only who wish the Anglosphere to cast off the anchor of its traditions and literature so that it will drift aimlessly in a sort of multicultural soup, but they also wish to stop people thinking about things too hard. And if there's one thing you can say about Shakespeare's plays, is that they make you think, sometimes to the point of getting a headache. So I'm going to show you how relevant Macbeth is right now. And while I'm doing that, I want you to remember that this is proof, not only that whatever has happened or been written about before, but also because great literature contains observations about human nature which repeats itself, we ignore both history and great literature at our peril. Now, let's talk about Macbeth. While I relate the skeleton structure of the story, I want you to think about what's happening in the USA right now and see if you can observe the similarities that I have noticed. So here goes. A weak man in a subordinate position in the ruling class is under the influence of a very ambitious woman, a ruler in her own right, and a group of hags who are somewhat outsiders but who wield strange and mysterious powers. Well, he is induced to aim for the ultimate power over his country, a position he can attain only by cheating his way to the top. He eliminates the rightful ruler and purges any witnesses who might raise a question about what really happened. To maintain his position, he and the powerful woman who has pushed him along are forced into more and more lies and more subterfuge, especially when it becomes obvious that he really isn't up to the job. And he can't properly handle the various factions both within his kingdom and from abroad. He continues his trajectory because he's already sold his soul and has little to lose, but everything falls apart around him. That's the play. Does it sound familiar? I want to remind you, by the way, that the real King Macbeth presided over an efficient administration which promoted Christianity in a place and at a time when Christianity was certainly not dominant. In 1040, he did kill the previous king, Duncan, in a fair battle. Well, as fair as battles were at the time, and then he ruled well for 14 years. During that time, his kingdom was quiet and, well, it was peaceable enough for Macbeth to travel to Rome in 1050, which must have taken him months, for a papal celebration. He was himself finally killed in battle in 1057 by another usurper to the throne, who became Malcolm III. But yeah, well, that was mostly the way things were done in Scotland. I suppose his age would have been a factor in his loss of the fight, because he was over 50 by then, which would have made him really rather old by the standards of the time. What I'm pointing out by telling you about the real story of Macbeth is that just about the only thing Shakespeare's play has in common with the real man is the name. So why do you think that Shakespeare wrote it like that? He could have written a completely different story. Well, there are a couple of reasons. One of them is political, but I'm not going to go into that right now. The other reason is that Shakespeare was playing around with a set of circumstances in which a certain type of person is put into a situation he can't handle. If you regard Macbeth's habit of seeing ghostly knives urging him onto action and spirits of dead rivals turning up at dinner, not as real things, but as a sort of allegory about a disintegrating mind, then you have even more to think about. So let's recap. A weak man pushed by a strong-minded but completely amoral woman and a squad of unpleasant females, who is even at the beginning of the play showing signs of cognitive failure, cheats his way into the top position, fumbles a series of strategic decisions, resulting in a lot of dead people on his hands, which he finds too difficult to handle. Now, was Shakespeare a prophet? No, of course he wasn't, but he knew the capacity of evil that ambition can produce. Ambition with good strategy, as well, let's say Henry V, is ambition which is rewarded with success and good governance. Ambition which is there for the sake of ambition, ambition which has no real plan beyond the seizing of power, leads the plotter to the edge of a height with no plan to deal with it. Now, Lady Macbeth is a good example of this. She had attained the heights of being a queen, but having no other plan beyond that, ends up walking off a wall and falling over a cliff to her death. Macbeth himself ends his whole sorry saga with no choice but to trust the devil, who betrays him as devils are wont to do. Well, wouldn't you call the Taliban the devil? I certainly would. As for Macbeth, the one in the play, that is, almost his last words are addressed to his manservant. In the heat and the noise of the battle, he calls for that servant several times. The servant is called, well, it's spelt like this, and it's pronounced Satan. Why not treat yourself or a favoured relative or friend to these magnificent examples of merch? The mugs and t-shirts come in the Graniopteryx design or Granbo with a firearm or the more deadly knitting needles. Go to www.graniopteryx.com and whatever platform you're watching this on, please click like, subscribe and share.